Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Right Guys podcast. Hey, those anti-Trump judges, they're out of control, and we're going to talk about it. And now your hosts, Josh Hammerling and Max McGuire.
Welcome back. Another edition of the Right Guys podcast. Happy Wednesday. My name is Max McGuire here with Mr. Producer Josh Hammerling. We lived through the first Trump term. We experienced the nationwide injunction after nationwide injunction. It is very interesting to me that the judges who seem most eager to block Donald Trump's policies nationwide are the same district court judges. Many of them are the same district court judges who were so willing themselves to loosely read the law to send January 6ers to prison for a long time on misdemeanors that the Supreme Court later smacked them down and said, you're not allowed to do this, right? I'm sorry, I don't believe a judge saying that we have to, when the judge says we have to strictly read the law, and that same judge stretched the law to put January 6ers in prison, I call bullshit on it, right?
Yeah.
I call bullshit. It rings extremely hollow. And there was a study, a paper put in the Harvard Law Review. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Put in the Harvard Law Review. Zoom in so everyone can read it. Looking at the data set of nationwide injunctions this century, so since 2000, George W. Bush, in both of his terms, there were 6 nationwide injunctions, and 3 of them were by judges appointed by the president of the opposing party. So they were Carter judges, they were Clinton judges. Obama had 12 total injunctions over 2 terms, 7 of which were from judges appointed by Republican presidents. Trump has had 64 nationwide injunctions.
Wow.
59 of them were by judges appointed by the opposing party. So 92%. And then Biden had 14 in 4 years. They were all by Republican judges, 100%. But it's this number here, the 64 divided by 59. These injunctions are supposed to be rare. They're supposed to be something that's only used in the rarest of circumstances when it is absolutely necessary. I remember, Josh, we were talking last year, and I was all happy because I was a member of a gun rights organization, and that gun rights organization had got an injunction against the pistol brace rule for all of its members. And then the state of Texas got an injunction blocking the Biden administration's pistol brace rule for all residents of Texas. But you, living in Colorado, weren't protected. So even though that pistol brace rule was ultimately shot down and it's dead, right? It was ruled unconstitutional, illegal. For the duration of that court case, I was protected and you were not.
Yeah.
You would have either been forced to live illegally with these items or destroy them, give them away, surrender them, sell them. You don't have to say what you did, but those are different tiers of justice. When something is obviously unconstitutional and only some people are protected, they go, wait, what's going on? Where's the nationwide injunction for that? Right? Republican appointed judges are very reluctant to issue nationwide injunctions, especially at the district court level, because they recognize they're at the lowest level in the federal court system and they only preside over that district.
Yeah.
It's like from the first Trump term, the Hawaiian judge, I forget his name. Every time you turn around, a judge in Hawaii is issuing a nationwide injunction blocking an immigration policy. Like, what are we doing here?
Well, it feels like an effort to make sure that no matter what Donald Trump does, somebody tries to slow him down or blocks him. And that's been the plan from day one. We don't want Trump to succeed. We are going to leverage every low life judge in the federal system to try to issue nationwide injunctions. It could be Donald Trump saying that he's making election day a national holiday or something like that, and they'd
Yeah.
probably throw in an injunction on it, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what it is; they're going to pick it, and they're going to go after it. And to see the total number of 64 of those, how many of those happened in just the last 80? Like, how long has he been in now? Almost 50, 80 days. 80 days.
Josh, in the month of February alone, district courts have issued more universal injunctions and TROs against the Trump administration than they did in the first 3 years of the Biden.
No. Bullshit. Really?
I mean, this is one of the Trump administration's filings before the Supreme Court. District courts have issued more universal injunctions and TROs during February 2025 alone than through the first 3 years of the Biden administration. The sharp rise in universal injunctions stops the executive branch from performing its constitutional functions before the court fully examine the merits of those actions and threatens to swamp this court's emergency docket.
Wow. That's well, I mean, the writing's on the wall. You can see it, right? You can see that there's a bunch of liberal justices are they trying to neuter the power of the executive? I mean, that's what it feels like, right? I mean, the more this happens, the more it's allowed to continue. They become emboldened too. There's a lot going on here, Max. I mean, it's a concentrated effort, and why does the left always seem to be the party that loves to do this? And if they can't do it at the judge level, they'll go out and start burning the Teslas, or they'll go out and start burning buildings, right? I mean, this is all part of the plan, and that blows my mind in February alone.
This one just came down today. Yesterday today, a judge has blocked Trump's executive order barring transgender people from the military. So it was policy in the military up until Biden. Biden was in office for 4 years, changed it, and Trump wanting to change it back is unconstitutional. And oh, by the way, this judge is the Biden appointee.
Shocking. Shocking. So the radical comes in, changes everything. It becomes, quote unquote, an unspoken law of the land, and every judge thinks that they're above the law and is deciding to go after the administration on everything. I mean, what's it going to be next? Is it going to, if he pardons the turkey at Thanksgiving? I mean, are they going to throw an injunction on that one? I'm waiting for it to be everything.
There was a really funny, I can't find it right now, but there was a really funny Babylon Bee post on social media. Federal judge orders astronauts back to space station.
and laughed. And one of the Kellys just did not like the idea that Elon Musk went up there and threw it together overnight. Let's be honest, like going up and rescuing them is not a do it in 3 months sort of operation at NASA, right? They didn't do anything for 9.
Oh yeah. And the left is trying to say, oh, well, this flight was always going to go up. Yeah, but it wasn't supposed to bring back those people. It was supposed to bring back other things. There were people up there for months and months. That's like saying, oh yeah, sure, you were rescued at sea, but that fishing trawler was going to be in that area anyway. Like, no, give them credit. Give them credit for the rescue, but no, they can't even do that. They can't even do that. No,
it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's the first time a civilian has helped NASA. Like, it's historical. Anyway, keep going, man. I'm just pissed.
I mean, just this judge issuing this ruling for the military, no matter how you slice it, the military, Pentagon, has determined that being transgender is incompatible with military service because of the strain it puts on supply chains, and because, frankly, they say it in the order that in order to be in the military, you have to be true to yourself. And someone who says they are a different gender trapped in the wrong body, definitionally, is not true to yourself.
Yeah.
Right. But like, just think about how radical this judge's order is. Right. This judge is basically saying that the Pentagon, in addition to shipping ammunition to the front line, in addition to shipping MREs, right, all the things that have to go into the supply chain to reach frontline soldiers, they also now have to ship refrigerated hormone treatments. And that if someone on the front lines has gender dysphoria, the Pentagon now has to, in the supply chain, move refrigerated hormone treatments all over the place. I mean, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It doesn't stop there, though. At what point will they try to determine what he can do with the military or what he can do with the Secret Service or anything that the executive branch could do? A federal judge on the lower circuit can just start willy-nilly picking things they don't like and then
No,
put an
oh, yeah.
injunction on it. This is getting out of control. Man, this is almost it's not treasonous yet, but if we were to bring back those terrorists that were flown to El Salvador on the plane, and it's determined Trump was right, was that judge aiding and abetting terrorists at that point? Is he
Yeah.
committing treason at that point? I mean, there's questions I have.
Yeah. Listen, there is a whole list of medical disorders you cannot have in the military.
Yeah.
You can't even
Sure.
be on ADHD medicine in the
Really?
military. You can't.
Wow.
They really don't
Interesting.
want you on any medicine because of just the complications of having to move that medicine around. Like, you get deployed overseas, they can't be worrying about whether you're going to hurt someone if you don't have your ADD meds because the supply truck got blown up, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they can't do it.
Seems
And-
hard enough.
Yeah. And this judge saying, okay, well, all that's okay, but this one, you can't ban these people, even though they were always banned. And Biden changed it. You have to follow Biden. That's just the rule. You have to keep what Biden had going. There was another judge who just shut down the Department of which one?
U.S. Peace.
No,
It was the
EPA
Mhm.
clawing back. Remember that undercover video
yeah,
from it was either from
Golden Bars video.
the Golden Bars video.
Gosh, yeah,
where they
yeah,
got people in the EPA admitting on camera that they are just trying to send as much money out the door as possible, right? And it's like throwing gold bars off the Titanic. The Trump administration found the gold bars, froze the gold bars, and said, okay, we're canceling these grants. These were not processed in the normal way that grants are processed. We're done, right? They admitted that they were doing this just to get rid of money so we couldn't stop it. A judge swooped in and said, no, you're not allowed to claw back that money. Now, anything the Trump administration does, they look at Administrative Procedures Act, like, oh, did you cross every T and dot every I? Did you do everything possibly right? With this, like, oh, so what if they were just tossing gold bars over the Titanic? They're allowed to do that. You can't claw it back. It's insane.
It's because then who's in control at this point? Like there's got to be the Supreme Court has to step in and start limiting what these federal judges can do on the lower courts. I mean, there has to be, right? Otherwise, we're just not going to have an executive.
That's what the Trump administration is now asking the Supreme Court. This is part of their filing. This court should declare that enough is enough before district courts' burgeoning reliance on universal injunctions becomes further entrenched. The court should stay the district court's preliminary injunctions, except as to the individual plaintiffs and the identified members of the organizational plaintiffs. And if the court concludes that states are proper litigants, as to the individuals who are born or reside in those states. At a minimum, the court should stay the injunctions to the extent they prohibit agencies from developing and issuing public guidance regarding the implementation of the order. Only this court's intervention can prevent universal injunctions from becoming universally acceptable. This is an interesting point. This is them talking about the birthright citizenship case.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what they're saying is it's going to take time for this regulation to be implemented. Right now, the injunction should only apply to named plaintiffs or the states. The government should be allowed to continue the rulemaking process so that when we win this, we can implement it on day one. As opposed to when they win it now, they'll have to start from scratch at that whole rulemaking process because the nationwide injunction prohibits anyone in government from even working on this, even making the pamphlets that would go in government offices, right? So it's a common sense thing. You sued, you think that you want to block this without even having arguments, without even looking at briefs, just blocking it because you think they're going to win. Well, that shouldn't stop the government from being able to work this out in the event that the government wins these cases, right? I mean, that should be common sense. Another element of this is technically the federal rules state that if a plaintiff is seeking a nationwide injunction against the government, they have to put up a bond. They have to put
Yeah.
up a bond to cover the costs, expenses, and damages associated with if they get this injunction and lose, the harm that they cause with a frivolous injunction. Right now, these activist judges aren't forcing the issue on the bond. They're not forcing the ACLU to put up a bond, basically saying, hey, you know what? If the government suffers harm from Trump not being able to deport any foreign enemies, we'll pay for that harm. Of course they don't, Josh, because what happens if the government identifies a terrorist, the court says you're not allowed to remove them, like one of these Tren Aragua people, and then they murder someone.
Yeah.
That would put the ACLU on the hook, right?
Yeah.
So of course they don't want to put a bond forward. Of course they don't want to. But that's another thing that's supposed to protect the American people from this. And the courts are saying, oh, no, we'll just rule from the bench.
But they have to follow the rules just as much as everybody else does. Why do they think they're suddenly above the law to put these injunctions out there, to not follow it to the T of the code? I mean, I don't understand it. We do understand it because they're just shills trying to slow down the first 100 days. You know, most presidents get a holiday in the first 100 days. Like most stuff gets done pretty quick. Donald Trump has been getting stuff done at a breakneck speed, but they've been pushing every day that he got on there. Like from day one, they were pushing back. They had teams of lawyers just waiting, right? The ACLU's been watching everything. So it's partisan politics. That's all this is partisan politics. And you got judges thinking they can legislate from the bench. I have a problem with that. You know, that it's bullshit. And it's getting people angry. It's just, I don't know, man. There's at some point, people got to say no. I mean, yeah, I want it to be over.
This judge, this James Boasberg. Let's see if I can find his picture.
James Boasberg.
He is the judge who has put the injunction against the Trump administration, saying that the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 no longer is enforceable by the Trump administration, saying, don't you dare try to remove any alien enemies. This is him, James Boasberg. I want to we read the actual law on our last episode. I want to briefly read a Supreme Court case called Luedecke v. Watkins. This is from 1948, when World War II, the United States sought out Germans in the United States and either removed them from the United States or interned them, because we were at war with Germany, and we can't just have German nationals running around our country when we're at war with Germany. Here is the part I really want to read. As Congress explicitly recognized in the recent Administrative Procedure Act, some statutes preclude judicial review. Barring questions of interpretation and constitutionality, the Alien Enemy Act of 1798 is such a statute. Its terms, purpose, and construction leave no doubt. The language employed by the Fifth Congress could hardly be made clearer or be rendered doubtful by the incomplete and not always dependable accounts we have of debates in early years of Congress. That such was the scope of the act is established by controlling contemporaneous construction. The act concerning alien enemies, which confers on the president very great discretionary powers respecting their persons. That's the quote. Here, the very nature of the president's power. There we go, right here. The very nature of the president's power to order the removal of all enemy aliens rejects the notion that courts may pass judgment upon the exercise of his discretion. This view was expressed by Mr. Justice Iredell shortly after the act was passed. And every judge before whom the question has since come has held that the statute barred judicial review. We would so read the act if it came before us, without the impressive gloss of history. The power with which Congress vested the president had to be executed by him through others. He provided for the removal of such enemy aliens as were deemed by the Attorney General. So this is like the bit of that individual instance where the president tasked the Attorney General with figuring it out, right? But such a finding at the president's behalf was likewise not to be subjected to the scrutiny of courts. For one thing, removal was contingent not upon a finding that in fact an alien was dangerous. The president was careful to call for the removal of aliens deemed by the Attorney General to be dangerous. But the short answer is that the Attorney General was the president's voice and conscience. A war power of the president, not subject to judicial review, is not transmuted into a judicially reviewable action because the president chooses to have that power exercised within narrower limits than Congress authorized. And so we reach the claim that while the president had summary power under the act, it did not survive cessation of actual hostilities. This claim, in effect, nullifies the power to deport aliens, for such deportations are hardly practicable during the pendency of what is colloquially known as the shooting war. So this is basically saying when the war is over, it's over. Josh, this is the Supreme Court case from 1948.
Yeah.
1948. And it says very, very clearly, this is not something that courts can intervene and say, prove it.
Yeah. Because it's meant to make sure that political dissidents don't invade your country and try to overthrow and corrupt the nation, which is something that the founding fathers knew was going to happen. It's something that every Supreme Court has said gives the power to the president to be able to execute. And it's been established for years. Since when does a bunch of Supreme Court decisions just get nullified because one judge in D.C. decides he wants to stop it?
It's
It's right in their face. He is willingly throwing the Constitution and the Alien Sedition Act into the garbage with this by doing this. So why is he still on the bench? Why are we tolerating it?
He's trying to carve out an exception. Listen, these judges are smart. I mean, he's no dummy, right? He's trying to carve out an exception that while this Supreme Court case dealt with the part of the law that refers to war, declaration of war, right? The Supreme Court did not say that the next sentence about incursions and invasions couldn't be judicially reviewable. That's bullshit, right? The whole law is non-justiciable, right? It cannot be reviewed. It was written so as not to be reviewable. Imagine if you can't have a country this way, right?
Yeah.
Imagine that the president has to make the decision whether or not to hit an enemy who just attacked us. Imagine if you had to go through the district court first. You can't have it, right?
No.
There are some executive powers granted to the president whether by the Constitution or by law, that are not judicially reviewable. Period. Full stop. And if there is to be a judicial review, it is not a district court judge who decides whether it's constitutional or not. He can say, nope, it's not judicially reviewable. And then the other side can appeal it to the appellate court. They have to rule that it's not reviewable. They appeal it to the Supreme Court. And then only the Supreme Court gets to decide whether it wants to reverse its own precedent. I mean, this is common sense stuff.
And it feels so treasonous, because if you can prove that there was an effort by these people to act in a way to give aid and comfort to the enemies, these decisions these judges are creating, which are politically based, would mean that they are acting in almost a treasonous manner. They're allowing people who would cause harm to the United States to have safe harbor.
Yeah,
they'd allow them to live here. So, I mean, this feels real dirty. Like, is that the plan from the start? Was to just try to subvert the entire executive? I mean, I feel like that's the plan here.
Josh, federal law allows the president to fire at will employees who haven't gone through their probationary period. At will. The president can just determine, I don't think you're doing a good job. Right? And that's what the president did. Fired him, said, I don't think you're doing a good job. I looked at the agency. I looked at how the agency is a shit show. And I said, you're not doing a good job and you're fired. A judge just said you're not allowed to do that. A judge just said you have to do one by one review.
She would never be able to do it.
You have to hire them all back. Hire them all back.
Holy shit, man.
It's insane. It's insane.
And nobody's talking about it. Do you think MSNBC's bringing? I love that cut, by the way. Who's reporting it? Maybe a bit of Fox. You're seeing it on X, but then you head over to to Maddow and you start listening to her, she's not on the air anymore, but over MSNBC, you're listening to those guys talk, and they're almost defending these judges' actions as though the judges are righteous in what they're doing. I mean, they're pretending that people are being righteous that are subverting the Constitution and settled. Like the Alien Seditions Act is settled, has been settled several times, and still he's trying to carve out an exception.
Yeah,
and here we are. Like, at what point does the Supreme Court step in and say, I mean, can they slap something on these lower court judges and say, hey, listen, what you're doing is unlawful? How does that shake out? Like, who gets to stop them? Who can stop them?
No, I mean, there's no one who can. And listen, we've heard a phrase over and over again, just in the last however many days Trump's been in office, and that is checks and balances, right? You hear that over and over again.
Yeah.
Checks and balances. And they say, oh, the judicial branch is important because they have a check. They're a check against the president, right? That's the check, and they balance out presidential power. Well, do you know what the other check is? That when judges get it wrong, Congress can remove them. Congress can remove them from power through impeachment. Right? We have a system of government with co-equal branches where no one branch has control over the others, right? It's like one big game of rock, paper, scissors, shoot, right? Right? It pretty much is. Like paper covers rock, scissors cuts paper, rock destroys scissors. It's very much like that. The judicial branch may be able to stop the executive branch, but the legislature, if it is out of control, if the judicial branch is deemed out of control, can impeach those judges. Well, this week, we had a crazy situation where the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court decided to weigh in response to calls for some of these activist judges issuing nationwide injunctions to be impeached. And this is what he said. For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. Well, that's horseshit. You can't say that you have checks and balances and then say, oh, well, no, the legislature can't use its check. Right? Because that's what impeachment is, right? The legislature has the ability to confirm the judges through the Senate or impeach a bad judge with both the House and the Senate working together, right?
Yes.
To say that it's not an appropriate response is to say that Congress has no check. There is no balancing act. That the legislature can just tell the government, the judiciary can tell the government what to do, and the other 2 branches are powerless to do anything about. Right? Because the executive part of it that no one likes to talk about is you issued a BS ruling, go ahead and enforce it. Right? I mean, that's been something that's been uttered many times by presidents. Say, okay, you and what army, basically? That we get into constitutional crisis, right? But the real constitutional crisis here is that the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court just declared that the legislative check against judicial outrageousness is not appropriate. That's crazy.
Right. His statement that more than 2 centuries it's been established that impeachment is not appropriate response. Well, we've never had to actually do it now because the left has made it so radical to be a judge now that we have to actually start flexing that muscle. They have the left has bastardized the judicial so much that this stuff now has to be used. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, his statement rings hollow. We have bad judges. If they're doing bad things, then they must be and shall be removed.
There is nothing normal about activist judges imposing more injunctions against Trump in 1 month than they did against Biden in 3 years. There is nothing normal about that. And so he can talk about 200 years. we are not the ones who departed from that tradition, right?
Yeah.
Look at where the departure happened. Was it with Bush?
Nope.
No. Was it with Obama for all of his
No.
lawlessness? No. The departure from the status quo happened when Donald Trump took office, and he decided to actually implement the policies that Republicans had been promising to implement for decades, for generations in some cases, right? Republicans have been running on these promises. For example, shutting down DACA, the Dreamers, the amnesty for illegal aliens. Republicans had been running on that for almost 2 terms. Donald Trump does it, and liberal judge, oh, nope, can't do that.
Yep.
Even though you ran on it, even though you were elected on it, even though the amnesty itself is not legal or constitutional.
I know.
You're not allowed to stop it. Nationwide injunction.
This
It's
is
crazy.
an absolute shit show from them. And this is what the liberal left has done for years. And they love to project what they do on Republicans and others because they're going to blame Republicans for all of these injunctions. If you guys didn't have such bad policies, we wouldn't have to put all these injunctions on there. Like the moral justification for this stuff has also become just gross to watch, especially when people are like setting cars on fire, right? The left thinks they have this moral high horse that is false. They have the biggest false moral high horse I've ever even seen. And it's pervasive. It goes all the way through their judicial nominees down to the people that protest in the streets.
Yeah.
It feels, I mean, it feels almost like a coup every time they put an injunction on what he does. They're trying to neuter the power of the president with every injunction. I'm waiting for them to start saying things like, well, and now we have to get rid of the president of the United States. Maybe throw the Constitution away and start all over, right? Is that the next step for them?
They love to talk about the Constitution. But we say, okay, well, what about this old law that many of the people who ratified the Constitution also voted to pass into law, right? The Alien Enemies Act. What about that? Oh, no, that's a 227-year-old law. Whoa, right? I mean, again, this was the founding generation of our country that voted to give the president a power that is not judicially reviewable to, during a time of war or invasion or violent incursion, to remove alien enemies from the country. And to say, well, that's unconstitutional. That's bullshit. Because to say that is to say that the same people who ratified the Constitution were wrong in passing one of the earliest laws. Like, this is one of our first laws.
Well, yeah.
One of our first immigration laws.
They realized it was basic country stuff. If somebody's in here trying to take down your country, you have to get rid of them. And the president should have power to do so. Because what happens if those people that are subverting your country succeed? Then you have something worse. It's a preservation of our union and our country. It's insane.
And so just to be clear, what this case about the Alien Enemies Act is, Donald Trump has been saying for years that Venezuela is emptying its prisons, its mental institutions, and sending their prisoners here. Yeah. That is not something that Donald Trump made up. That is something that was briefed to Congress.
Yeah.
Right? That is something that is actually provable. The problem is, it's no one's business to know how the government knows that. Because the minute you tell how they figure that out, you give up what's called sources and methods.
Yeah.
Right? The government has lots of different intelligence collecting methods, and many of them are secret. The government is pretty certain that the Maduro regime is encouraging these gang members to come to the U.S., in some cases even releasing them from prison as long as they leave. I mean, and this is nothing new. This is something that countries have been doing for centuries. As long as there has been an America, there has been a country trying to dump their prisoners into our country. Yeah. No joke. After the Revolutionary War, the British tried to do that to us, to dump their prisoners here. The French tried to do that to us. Lots of countries have tried to do that to us. So it's nothing new. But what this judge is basically saying is, okay, prove it. Originally, the judge asked them to prove it in open court.
Yeah.
Prove how you know that the Maduro regime was responsible for sending these gang member terrorists to the United States. Reveal your sources and method. Burn your source. Burn your method. If you are listening in on their phone calls, the minute that hearing happens in court, they know they break the phone in half. No longer have it tapped. The minute that they learn that you have a source inside the administration, that guy has a bullet in his head.
Yeah.
This is why you do not debate sources and methods in district court. You just don't.
Well, they don't support abortion, so what makes you think they'd want to preserve the life of somebody that was doing work for the United States to give us intelligence out in the field? They don't care about that person's life. I want those sources to remain. As a country, you have to have a spy network because everybody out there wants to destroy you. Everybody wants to destroy us right now. Pick the country in BRICS that enjoys us, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason you have to have these methods. And to sit there and try to tell the administration they need to expose it, that would neuter the intelligence gathering capabilities of the United States completely. And that feels like it's part of the plan.
There's a reason that many parts of the executive powers are not judicially reviewable.
Yeah.
Calling back to the first case we talked about, the Pentagon saying that transgender people are incompatible with military service. A judge just said, you're wrong. They are. That judge never served a day in his or her life, right? That judge isn't a psychiatrist. That judge isn't a medical doctor. That judge just decided that this Pentagon policy, which again is the same exact Pentagon policy that has existed for every single year except for the last 4 years, right, is wrong. It's wrong. He's just saying you're wrong.
Magically.
You're wrong. You're wrong.
Right. Sprinkled fairy dust on it, made it all wrong. Now I'm right, and you've got to do what I say. I think the brazenness of it too pisses me off, Like they're just complete pricks about the whole thing too.
There are a lot of protected classes of people who are protected from discrimination by law, but the military is still allowed to say, no, you're not going to serve. Right? Yeah. Look at the ADA. Yeah. If you are born without legs and without arms, you have a really hard life. And the law protects you from being discriminated against as you go about your day, as you go into businesses, as you want to buy a home, things like that, right? If that man who has no arms and no legs shows up at a recruiting station and says, I want to join the military is allowed to say, no, you don't have any arms, you don't have any legs. Mm-hmm. Any other thing, any other situation, like short of like situation where you really need arms and legs, it would be discrimination, right?
Yeah.
Or it would be discrimination unless you could prove that there was a reasonable accommodation. The Pentagon does not have to make a reasonable accommodation for people missing limbs. They just don't, right? So there's a whole host of disabilities, of classes of people, right, who in any other situation would have a lawsuit on their hands. When it comes to the military, no, the military can say no, right? If you have anxiety disorder, you cannot be discriminated against because of your anxiety disorder. But the military can say, yeah, we're not giving you a gun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? We're not giving you a gun.
Well, think about this can of worms it opens. Now, anybody who's been denied anywhere or could be anything like weird or, maybe they've got some sort of deformity, you name it, whatever it may be, they can now sue to be able to be placed in the government.
They can't.
By that reasoning. They
can't, because the law still says that you can be denied. But what this judge is saying is transgender people are different.
Now they could sue to get in. You have to accept them no matter what. But that leads to the next person who says, well, I've got suicidal tendencies. I should be allowed to join the military, even though you don't want them serving next to you in a foxhole with a grenade.
Josh, the Trump administration brought into court the documents, which we've talked about on the show at length, that people with gender dysphoria have a higher than average incidents of suicidal tendencies and suicidal thoughts, right? And that is as a result of their gender dysphoria, where they believe they were born in the wrong body and they believe that their life is terrible, and they have a higher than average both incidents of suicidal thought, suicidal tendencies, and actually committing suicide than the average member of the population. The Pentagon says, no, we do not take suicidal people. We do not take people who have a higher risk of suicide and give them a gun, give them a grenade, give them a rocket launcher, give them a tank. We do not do it. You do not do it, because in the heat of the moment, you have to know that they're going to point the gun forward, not backward, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there would be no stopping the stuff you'd have to give them, like medical treatments, their hormones. If you didn't have legs or arms, a wheelchair. Like they would have to start accommodating. You'd have two different kinds of armies at that point. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
I want to tell you how the judge responded to this really cut and dry. They have a higher than normal suicide rate that is incompatible with military service. The judge replied that they have a higher suicide rate because they are discriminated against. And this is discrimination. So if you want them to have a lower suicide rate, stop discriminating against them. That is not science. That is not medicine. That is leftism, right? That is leftist talking points. But that was part of this injunction, Josh. Just making it up as they go along. Just making it up.
And there's still no party that's been harmed. There's no bond. The class action suit being brought in people's names without actually having the group of people who have been harmed. I mean, it's getting out of control. And the Trump administration's got to see the writing on the wall. Like what's the plan?
To appeal it. But I mean, the goal is to gum this up in the works. They've got to get a Supreme Court ruling shutting this down. They have to. Otherwise, they're just going to gum this up for 4 more years.
Yeah.
Right? There has to be some urgency to this. There just has to be, right? I mean, there are Second Amendment cases. I don't know if you've ever seen this in California that have been waiting 2-3 years for a final ruling, right? The courts are very good at slowing things down when they don't want to issue rulings, right? When anti-gun judges know that they're going to have to protect the Second Amendment, they take a really long time doing it, right? The courts are very good at slowing things down. They're very bad at speeding things up, because the thought is you have the right to a speedy trial, sure, but you have the right to a trial that is going fast enough where you can actually pay attention, right? At some point, going super fast becomes a detriment. So it's very hesitant to rush things, but they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to at some point get a ruling to stop this, because unless they do, Josh, every Biden judge is just saying, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Doesn't matter that it's how it was done for 200 plus years. Can't do that.
I mean, the Supreme Court's got to be seeing this. They know. They're paying attention to the news. They're probably being briefed daily. So why come out with a statement trying to or saying that in 200 years it's rarely used and you shouldn't be going and impeaching these judges, right? It makes no sense. They're being kind of cowards on the bench, is what I'm seeing.
They truly believe in their heart of hearts that when people say co-equal branches, checks and balances, that the judiciary is on top of it all. They don't see it as co-equal branches. They see it as the judiciary decides. And no matter what the judiciary says, you just got to accept it, right? You just got to accept it. Well, you don't, right? Congress can impeach the judiciary. Congress can change the law. Congress and the American people can change the Constitution. There are checks against the judiciary. And for whatever reason, John Roberts wants to take impeachment out of that list. Says it's not acceptable. No, it is acceptable. And based on all this, warranted. 100%.
Yeah. Now is the time. So who's going to be brave enough to start the process? I mean, it's going to probably be an MTG. It's probably going to be some of the really stronger conservative voices out there. And if it's going to happen, it has to happen now, because We're already through 100 days. There's only so many days Donald Trump has as president. I mean, each one of them matter. And they need to get stuff now. Ah, yeah, it's just the way they want everything to look. It makes me wonder if a lot of people on the bench right now don't like Trump. Like there's some anti-Trumpers that are on that bench in the Supreme Court.
If I told you that Judge Boasberg, the guy who is blocking Trump's deportation of these alien enemies, if I told you that his wife worked for an NGO that received USAID funding and ran abortion facilities in Washington, D.C., would you believe me? There she is.
So
there she is, giving people a tour, giving Kamala Harris's husband a tour of their abortion facility in Washington, D.C. There she is.
He should recuse himself. There's a shadow of I forget the name for it. It's escaping my head. But yeah, there's impropriety there.
Conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's impropriety here. He should not rule on anything. Oh my gosh. So is he being spiteful now with all these rulings because the money for his wife's abortion clinic?
At some point, you have to understand that you throw a rock in Washington, D.C., you're going to hit someone that someone knows, that someone's related to, right? They get beers with. People have interests. They have wives. They have kids. They have jobs, right? Being a federal judge doesn't mean that the kid or the wife can't do other things. That's fine, right? Judge Boasberg's daughter fights for prisoners' rights. So is it fair to say that he's ruling to help her, or that's just what they're all interested in, right? But it's up to the judge to recognize that at the very least, this creates the appearance of a conflict of interest. I say this over and over again. If you're new to watching the podcast, please give us a thumbs up, like, follow, subscribe. But I said this all the time. You don't have to prove the existence of a conflict. You just have to prove the appearance of a conflict to get a recusal. And if I was a judge and I was being brought a Trump administration policy and my wife's NGO is shutting down or laying people off because Trump just cut all of their funding, I don't know if I could be impartial.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if I could.
I mean, yeah, it would affect your income. And then the moment that you put in like this, you put an injunction on that order and force the salaries to be paid, and your wife continues to make money. I mean, that feels like a major conflict of interest. It's not about the law. It's about him making money at that point.
It reminds me of the Star Trek movie, the remake years ago, like 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
Where Spock just watched his whole planet get destroyed. And Kirk had to basically elicit an emotional response out of him to get control of the Enterprise. Basically had to prove that he's conflicted, right?
Yeah.
And the whole thing was, even though he is half Vulcan, has no emotions, even he couldn't hide it, right?
Yeah.
You have to think that these judges, I mean, just look at the one from New York, right? With Trump's criminal case. His daughter was working for congressmen who were working on the case and fundraising off of the case,
which is insane. And nobody points it out in the mainstream media. Nobody cares when it's the leftist who's corrupting the whole system, or nobody cares on the left. But when the right does it, man, it's holy hell. It has to be undone. It's just sick. But that's what we get.
It would be like with these conflicts, though, like just to go back to it, it would be one thing if the judge says, yeah, my wife does this, but don't worry, I'm going to be completely partial. It's another thing for him not to mention it.
Yeah.
And it's another thing for him to go beyond his power to issue a nationwide injunction, right?
It's just like, yeah.
I keep coming back to this word. It's just crazy. Yeah. It's just crazy. And the left says, oh, well, Trump is a threat to democracy. You know what's a threat to democracy? An unelected district court judge overturning a policy that's been in place for every year this country has been formed, except for the last 4 years. Or a district judge declaring that the Alien Enemies Act, which has been used and upheld by the Supreme Court and ruled by the Supreme Court to be not judicially reviewable for a leftist judge to step and say, actually, I'm going to review it anyway, and you can't deport alien enemies in the meantime. This judge saying, turn those planes around. No, that's not how it works. Because I don't know if I mentioned this in the last podcast, Josh. Imagine if that order had gotten to the pilots and they had turned around their plane and they had hit bad weather, got struck by lightning, and the plane crashed.
Yeah.
Or they turned around, got lost, ran out of fuel, crashed.
Okay.
Right? Or they had already been working so long, and turning around would force them to work longer than the hours allowed. All of a sudden, the pilot falls asleep at the wheel because turning around makes him fly even longer. Plane crashes. Would that judge have any responsibility? No.
Oh, I would think. Well, yes, but no.
You should, right?
Yeah.
But that is why you don't let a judge from the bench to just make a declaration that plane movements have to be changed, itineraries have to be changed, without him knowing anything, without him even knowing if the planes exist.
And then the next step is to call everyone in to see when and how they knew of the order that he gave, and that his word order should have been completely followed by the people that sent the planes up there. So he's not only like getting the terrorists to turn around, or at least trying to get the plane to turn around, he now calls in the people who are responsible for getting rid of those terrorists to make them explain their actions.
Josh.
And he doesn't have to explain any of his.
He is letting the ACLU run this case as if it's a class action. And he just demanded today that the government give him the list of people who were on the plane. How can the ACLU represent people if they don't even know what their names are? Right?
There'd be no standing.
How is that possible? Right? And how can the judge look at this executive decision that these people are alien enemies? How can the judge say, no, they're not, without even knowing their names?
They can't, which means that why would he issue the order if it's not a class action lawsuit? I mean, there's no basis for this.
We know that these people exist because we have videos of them being perp walked, right? But how can a judge refute an executive determination that these are alien enemies when he doesn't even know their names? How can he possibly say, no, they're not alien enemies? How can he possibly not defer to the executive branch? There's only one party in this entire case that knows who these people are. That's the federal government. And they are the only party losing.
So how, like, if this thing continues forward and the judge is upheld in this, or at least his decision is, anybody that Donald Trump would have deported would be able to sue as a class action lawsuit as well, and then be able to reinstate their right to come back into the country. Josh, it would be so lawless, dude. I mean, there's nothing. That's insane.
If this judge gets his way, any attempt by Trump to actually take out the cartels could be blocked by a single judge who has their family threatened by the cartel. Right? This is the other reason why this shouldn't be judicially reviewable, because the wider the decision-making process is, the more vulnerable that process is.
Yeah.
When you have the president in the Situation Room on a secure phone with the Joint Chiefs of Staff making decisions, right? And then you have a judge who doesn't have any Secret Service protection. He comes home, there's a cartel member with a gun to his wife's head saying, you will rule against the Trump administration or we'll kill you and your wife. All of a sudden, he has the same power. I mean, like, this is why you can't have this. You have to have a top-down decision-making process. And district court judges are not in that process. They're just not. This is not judicially reviewable. When the Pentagon says that of the many diseases and ailments and conditions that make someone not fit for service, we believe gender dysphoria is one of them. A judge can't just say, you're wrong. Let them all in.
Unbelievable. Yeah, no matter what decision. And it could go as far as telling a special ops team somewhere, not to be able to go and rescue Americans
Yeah,
or to take out a
yeah,
group somewhere. Like you'd have to ask the judge
yeah.
permission to start executing the kind of stuff that personally we don't need to know about, but needs to happen, right? Oh my gosh, and a total undressing.
The law says that the president and the administration can fire probationary employees. Donald Trump and his advisors took a look at the agency and said, "This agency sucks. We don't want these probationary employees. The agency sucks because the employees suck. We're firing who we can." Judge says, "Nah, you didn't think long and hard enough about that. You didn't interview them. You didn't review their work product. You got to hire them all back."
Yeah, and then the
Time also put something on Indeed. Hire even more.
yeah, and think of the mental gymnastics they have to do, because then they'd start justifying like other things they'd be able to do. They could put an injunction on every single thing a president did, and look at like the when he pardoned Hunter Biden, right?
Yeah.
Like any pardon the president hands out could thus be judicially reviewed.
Nope, that's not judicially. They admit that that's not judicially reviewable, right? So they have a very narrow view. The left has a very narrow view of what isn't judicially reviewable. Auto-penned pardons? Nope, can't even look at that. Don't even think about questioning that.
The hypocrisy, dude.
Yeah.
That's insane. So we'll just pick and choose the stuff that Donald Trump does that we don't like, and we'll find a sympathetic judge, and we'll get 7 of them to do it. I think the number I've seen now is there's like 7 of them that are really out there going hard against the administration. And I wonder how many of them are like Soros linked. I wonder how many of them had USAID family members, right? It makes you wonder how dirty some of these judges are. And, have we looked at all of their rulings? I mean, is there some really questionable stuff they've done?
Here's one. This is the one who's going after the Defense Department for the transgender ban. And we'll end on this. U.S. District Court Judge Anna Reyes, a Biden appointee who previously stated that the idea of only 2 sexes is not biologically correct, heard arguments. This judge is not only ruling against the Trump administration by saying, no, you're incorrect that there's only 2 sexes. There's more. There's more. This judge is demanding that Hegseth not only reverse the policy, but is demanding that he go on social media and post a retraction. Because Hegseth went on social media and said, this is the new policy of the Pentagon. We are not going to have transgender troops. This judge isn't just trying to reverse the policy. This judge is trying to force Hegseth to go on social media and say transgender troops are welcome.
Holy crap.
That is very different. Then you start getting into free speech territory, right? Which, yes, even the government and government employees do have speech protections. A judge can't force a government official, a cabinet official, to post something on social media. You just can't do that. Wow. You can say that what you posted is wrong. You say the policy doesn't apply anymore, but you can't say, okay, here's what you're going to post. Here's the apology you're going to post. It doesn't work like that. Give you the final word before we wrap up.
The more I watch this stuff, the more I realize that the left is willing to do whatever it takes to win. If they don't like what Trump's doing, we'll try to get him a felony. If we don't like what he's doing once he's in office, we'll get a judge to stop him at every corner. This is what you get when you vote for the left. Or if you know people on the left out there, at least expose what they're doing so they can see it. That's why you watch this show, and that's why we appreciate you watching this show.
We appreciate it. If you're watching for the first time, please do subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. We're on YouTube, we're on Rumble, we're on X. We also have the audio edition of the podcast available everywhere audio podcasts are found. That's it for this edition. My name is Max McGuire.
I'm Josh Hammerling.
Remember, the fight to take back our country is not over yet, but the only way we win is if we all stand up and fight together. See you next time.
See ya.